The year 48 BC marked the culmination of a bitter rivalry that had fractured the Roman Republic. Gaius Julius Caesar, a brilliant general and populist leader, found himself at odds with the senatorial elite. His primary adversary was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known as Pompey the Great, once his ally and son-in-law. The civil war had raged across the Republic's vast territories, from Italy to Spain. After a strategic retreat from Italy, Pompey had gathered a formidable army in the east. Caesar, ever the aggressor, pursued him, crossing the Adriatic Sea with his veteran legions. The initial confrontation at Dyrrhachium had been a setback for Caesar, a rare defeat. Forced to withdraw, Caesar marched his army inland into the plains of Thessaly. Pompey, urged on by overconfident senators in his camp, decided to follow and force a decisive battle. He believed his numerical superiority would guarantee a swift and final victory. The two armies finally converged near the town of Pharsalus, their camps separated by a few miles. The fate of Rome and the future of a republic that had stood for 5 centuries hung in the balance. On the morning of August 9th, the air was thick with anticipation and the heat of the Greek summer. Pompey commanded an army of nearly 45,000 infantry, a force that vastly outnumbered Caesar's. His cavalry was even more dominant, boasting a 7-to-1 advantage. Caesar, by contrast, could only field around 22,000 legionaries, many of them his most loyal veterans. His cavalry force was small, a mere 1,000 horsemen against Pompey's 7,000. Pompey's strategy was straightforward and relied on his overwhelming numbers. He planned to use his superior cavalry to smash Caesar's right flank. Once the flank was turned, his infantry would envelop and crush the smaller Caesarian force. To aid this, Pompey ordered his infantry to hold their position and not charge. He reasoned this would tire Caesar's men as they crossed the battlefield. Caesar, however, was a master of reading his opponent and the battlefield. He anticipated Pompey's reliance on his cavalry. In a stroke of tactical genius, he devised a secret countermeasure. He secretly detached several cohorts from his third line of infantry. This created a hidden fourth line, angled behind his own small cavalry force. He personally instructed these men to use their pila, not as throwing weapons, but as stabbing spears. Their targets were to be the faces and eyes of the enemy horsemen. The battle began with the advance of Caesar's legions. His men charged forward with a great roar, the sound echoing across the plain. Halfway across, Caesar's experienced centurions noticed Pompey's line was not moving. On their own initiative, they halted the charge to allow the men to catch their breath. After a brief pause, they reformed and completed their charge, crashing into the stationary Pompeian line. The clash of steel and the cries of men filled the air. As the infantry battle raged, Pompey gave the signal to his cavalry commander, Labienus. The massive force of Pompeian cavalry began its thunderous charge against Caesar's right flank. Caesar's small cavalry force braced for the impact, but was quickly overwhelmed. They fell back in a planned retreat, drawing the Pompeian cavalry further in. Confident of victory, Labienus's horsemen surged forward, their ranks becoming disordered in their eagerness. Then Caesar gave the signal. The hidden fourth line of infantry pivoted and charged forward. They did not throw their pila, but instead used them as pikes, aiming for the riders. The effect was devastating and utterly unexpected. The Pompeian cavalry, composed largely of young aristocrats, panicked at the brutal, close-quarters fighting. They were not prepared for such savagery and feared disfigurement. The charge faltered, And then the entire cavalry wing broke and fled the field in disgrace. Their flight left Pompey's left infantry flank completely exposed. Caesar immediately capitalized on the opportunity. He ordered his third, reserve line of fresh troops to enter the fray. Caesarian infantry, now bolstered by reserves and high on morale, began to push the Pompeian line back. The victorious fourth line, having routed the cavalry, now wheeled and crashed into the exposed flank of the enemy legions. Attacked from the front and the side, the Pompeian legions began to crumble. From his vantage point, Pompey the Great watched the collapse of his grand army. The sight of his invincible cavalry fleeing and his legions breaking was too much to bear. He lost his nerve, turned his horse, and rode back to his camp. He dismounted and walked into his command tent in a daze. How can man? Without their commander, the remaining resistance on the field dissolved into a full-scale rout. Caesar urged his men forward, telling them to spare Roman citizens but to press the attack on the camp itself. The Pompeian camp, filled with luxuries and signs of overconfidence, was quickly overrun. Inside his tent, Pompey shed his general's cloak and armor. Disguised as a common man, he gathered his family and gold and fled out the back of the camp. He rode for the coast, hoping to find a ship and escape to the provinces. The Battle of Pharsalus was over. Caesar's victory was total and absolute. Pompey's army had suffered catastrophic losses, with thousands killed and over 24,000 surrendering. Caesar's own reported losses were astonishingly low, a testament to his army's efficiency and his brilliant tactics. In a gesture of clemency, Caesar pardoned many of the high-ranking senators and officers who had fought against him. This act was designed to heal the wounds of the civil war and win over his former enemies. Among those pardoned that day was a young man named Marcus Junius Brutus. Pompey, the once great hero of the Republic, was now a fugitive. He fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young king, Ptolemy the 32. However, the king's advisors saw an opportunity to curry favor with the victorious Caesar. As Pompey stepped ashore from a small boat, he was treacherously stabbed and killed. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria a few days later, he was presented with Pompey's severed head. It is said that Caesar wept for the fate of his former rival, friend and son-in-law. The victory at Pharsalus effectively ended the organized senatorial opposition to Caesar. It was the decisive battle of the Civil War, sealing Caesar's position as the master of the Roman world. 500-year-old republic was, in all but name, finished. The path to the Roman Empire, with one man holding ultimate power, was now clear. The battle was a testament to the discipline of Caesar's legions. It showcased the loyalty they held for their commander. Pompey's army, though larger, lacked the same cohesion and veteran experience. The overconfidence of the senatorial faction proved to be a fatal weakness. They had underestimated Caesar's tactical flexibility. Caesar's use of the fourth line was an unconventional but brilliant move. It demonstrated his ability to adapt his strategy to exploit his enemy's weaknesses. Psychological impact on Pompey's cavalry was as important as the physical damage. Pompey's own failure of will at the critical moment sealed his army's fate. A leader's presence and resolve can be the deciding factor in a battle. The aftermath saw Caesar consolidate his power across the remaining provinces. While resistance would continue in Africa and Spain, it lacked a unified command. The great champion of the Republic, Pompey, was gone. Pharsalus was more than a military victory. It was a political turning point. It marked the end of a collective rule that had defined Rome for centuries. The concept of a single, powerful autocrat was now becoming a reality. The soldiers who fought at Pharsalus were instruments of this immense historical change. Their actions on that single day reshaped the entire Western world. The morning sun rose over a field of green. Dew clung to the blades of grass across the plain. Soon this ground would be soaked in blood. In Pompey's camp, there was an air of festivity. Tents were decorated with laurels, prepared for a triumph. Servants prepared a great feast for the victorious generals. This arrogance was a disease that had infected the command. In Caesar's camp, the mood was grim but resolute. They were outnumbered, hungry, and far from home. But they had Caesar. He moved among them, his presence a source of strength. He spoke not of victory, but of the justice of their cause. He reminded them of their shared struggles and triumphs. The bond between general and soldier was unbreakable. As the lines formed, a strange stillness fell over the field. Every man knew his life could end in the next hour. The trumpet sounded, a piercing call to battle. The first steps of the charge felt like an eternity. Then came the running, the pounding of thousands of feet. The air filled with the whir of pila flying through the air. The impact was a sickening crunch of wood and metal against flesh and bone. Swords were drawn, the gladius, the legionary's best friend. The fighting was a maelstrom of stabbing, slashing, and pushing. Men fought and died in a space of a few square feet. The centurions were the backbone of the line, roaring encouragement. They plugged gaps and drove their men forward. The rout of Pompey's cavalry was a moment of pure shock. Hope turned to despair in an instant. The flanking maneuver was executed with chilling precision. It was like a well-oiled machine of death. Pursuit after the battle was relentless. Caesar understood that a victory is not complete until the enemy is scattered. The captured camp was a scene of strange contrasts. The spoils of the wealthy lay next to the bodies of the slain. For the victors, there was exhaustion and relief. For the vanquished, there was humiliation and an uncertain future. The sun set on a different world than the one it had risen on. The echoes of Pharsalus would reverberate through history for millennia. It became a byword for a decisive, world-changing confrontation. Caesar's gamble had paid off spectacularly. His name would forever be linked with absolute victory. The Republic's final breath was exhaled on that dusty Greek plain.